Hello everybody, my name is Zeke and welcome to my channel. Today's video is going to be my wrap up for the month of April. I'm going to talk about the books I read. This month I had a good mix. I read seven books this month, which is pretty good for me. Definitely not the most I've read in a month, but I don't really care how much I read. It's more about the quality, as always. But definitely a very successful month quality-wise. I read a lot of great books. I only had one that I would consider a 5-star, but I think mostly 4 stars, and just a lot of things that will really stick with me for a while. And a good mix of mostly books, but also a novella. I read some short stories, which was good for me because I usually just read books and novels, so it's nice to branch out. So the first thing I read this month was McGlue by Ottessa Moshfegh. And Ottessa Moshfegh is an author that I have read a lot from before. I think I've read 3 of her other books, and this is not one of her most popular, but this was definitely one of her, I think this was like her breakout success. And this is a very weird book, and it's a very disturbing book. We basically follow this man, and he wakes up and he's like in jail, and he gets taken to the hold of a ship, and we don't really know what happened, but we know that he's like drunk and he did something bad, and he has like a gash in the side of his head. And it's just a very odd kind of story structurally and also stylistically, the way it's told. We're not really given explanation. We're kind of finding things out as we go along with the protagonist. And I think the ending is very shocking and very much fits in with all these stylistic choices and the very kind of grimy and rough feeling that we have throughout the whole novella. And it's really short too, and so I didn't necessarily love it. I think that it wasn't necessarily like mind-blowing, but it really did succeed at what it was trying to do, and it was really unlike anything I've ever read before, even from Ottessa Moshfegh. It's really very different from anything I've read from her before. This is set in like the 1800s, and everything else I've read by her has been from the 21st century or 20th century, and so it's just a very different setting for her, but she really does it well. And I gave it a 3 stars, but I would say like a high 3 stars because I did end up liking it. It just isn't like an all-time favorite, but definitely worth your time if you're looking for something that's a little weird and a little disturbing. Well, a lot disturbing, and just that will be very different and shock you, because it definitely shocked me. So the next book I read was Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. I've been reading some more of Daphne du Maurier's books recently. She's known for writing Rebecca, which I read in the fall of last year and loved. And I also read another book of hers, Frenchman's Creek, which I did not like very much at all. But I read Jamaica Inn this month near the beginning, and I didn't love it as much as Rebecca, but I don't think that's ever going to happen because that's one of my all-time favorite books as of reading it, even though I only read it recently. It was just really, really good. But Jamaica Inn, we follow this girl, and her parents have died. I forget the exact framing, but basically she has to go to live with her aunt in this place called Jamaica Inn, which is it's not in the middle of nowhere, but it's not in a town. It's like separated on the outskirts of this town, and everyone in the town knows that they're supposed to avoid it at any cost, and that weird things happen at Jamaica Inn because of her uncle, the man that her aunt married. And so she kind of gets there and has to kind of find her way about this new life and with this new person, her uncle, and all the things that are happening at Jamaica Inn. And it's just a very atmospheric novel. We get lots of descriptions of her wandering around the countryside, and it's also very dark and also very, like, the atmosphere itself is very dreary and really adds to that ambiance of the story. And she's just really good at creating these places that really feel like they have their own personality, and she did that so well in Rebecca with the mansion in Rebecca, and she does that so well with Jamaica Inn. And I think the weakest part is probably the plot, if we're being honest. It's not bad, but it's not like incredible. I think it really thrives with the setting and the atmosphere And I don't think the characters are perfect, but we really do get a good picture of our protagonist and the uncle, and I think the inn itself even acts as a character in a lot of ways. So I gave it like 3.5, 4 stars, just because it's not plot-wise maybe the best, and the ending I'm a little iffy on. Definitely very memorable. I wouldn't start with this if you were gonna read Daphne du Maurier, but I think it's definitely a good option, and it's a really interesting book. Okay, next up I read The Woman Destroyed, and this was incredible. This is a collection of 3 short stories, or they're not that short. Well, one of them's pretty short, but novella short stories, works of fiction written by Simone de Beauvoir in the later 1900s, but like the 1960s, I think. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure 1960s. And we just basically follow 3 different women and 3 different stories at kind of terrible parts of their life, if we're being honest. And I think obviously the title kind of alludes to that. And I think the first and third were definitely my favorites. In the first, we follow this woman who is kind of getting older. She's really dealing with a separation she feels from her husband. She's dealing with issues with her son, and it's just heartbreaking. And she's very, I don't really know how to describe it. She's not very, I mean, basically, she's not happy, and you really see her struggle with these things. And struggle with kind of finding out who she is. She's written a book, and it is just not going as well as her previous stuff has gone, and so she's kind of just contemplating her whole life, and it gets pretty depressing. And then the second one is like a monologue that I did not love. It's really stream of consciousness, and it's a little much. But the last one, we're following this woman as she finds out her husband is having an affair, and she kind of is just dealing with it and like staying with him. And it's also very depressing, very sad to see her kind of spiral and justify things and try to figure out how she's gonna move on in her life. And just depressing as all hell. And I think the first and last, all are both 4 or 5 stars, but that middle one was just okay. So I gave this 4 stars overall, but definitely really, really good, and definitely worth it for the first and third stories alone. Next, basically back to back with The Woman Destroyed, I read Black Swans, which is another short story collection by Eve Babbitt. Eve Babbitt is a writer I've been wanting to read for a while, and this isn't her most popular book, nor the book I was looking to pick up first, but I found it in a bookstore, and I thought might as well. And I ended up really loving it. I think she has a really unique voice, and these are fictional stories, but they feel very autobiographical, and you wouldn't know that they're fictional stories unless you kind of did your own research. Like, they really sound like she's telling stories from her life. And we're with her in LA, and we meet all of this huge cast of characters. Some of them recur throughout stories. She talks about places that matter to her or the character. It's a little blurred. But just, I think the really unique voice that she has really draws you into her personal experiences and the story she's telling and this character she's putting on, and you just really become enraptured by her picture of LA and her lifestyle and all these people that she knows, and you really feel like you're a part of this huge wealthy LA group of friends and acquaintances, and it's just really interesting, and she's really good at examining these people that she knows and these places that she frequents. It made me really want to read more of her stuff, because if this isn't like her most popular and some of her work is supposed to be better, like that's gonna do wonders for me. And so this was a 4-star. I loved a lot, and obviously there were some I liked less than others because it's a short story collection, but this was really incredible, and even I was expecting a lot from it, but I think it succeeded even my expectations. It was so good. Okay, next up I read Passing, and I read this for school as part of kind of our modernism and 1920s jazz age unit. And this is a short classic. I love short classics because you get a lot in just a few amount of pages. And this was also really, really good. In this story, we basically follow 2 women, Irene and Claire, and they're both Black women, but they're both able to pass as white, except Irene is married to a darker skinned Black man, so in her day-to-day life she doesn't pass, and Claire is married to a white man, and we find out more about that as the story goes on. But basically we open with Irene getting a letter from Claire apologizing for something that happened in Chicago, and we kind of go from there and we see their relationship, what happened in Chicago, how their relationship kind of moves on from that. And it's just a really interesting examination of race and of these two characters and of their very complex relationship. And I think the ending of this book is incredible. It's ambiguous, but it's not ambiguous in a stupid way. It's ambiguous in a really good way that really wraps up and ties together a lot of the themes that are present throughout this book. And I would just highly recommend. It's really, really short and really well worth your time. And despite this awful cover, I hate movie tie-in covers, it's so good. It's so good. And I gave this 4.5 stars. Okay, the next book I read was Real Life by, I think, Brendan Taylor. I don't have it in front of me. I got it from the library. And this one is something I did not rate because I liked a lot of what it was trying to say. We basically follow this queer Black man working for his PhD at this school. We follow his group of friends, his terrible workplace environment, and in my opinion, his terrible group of friends, and also this love interest that he's beginning to form a relationship with. And it only takes place over a couple of days, but we kind of just see a lot of shitty stuff happen to him, and also while this relationship is blossoming and while he's dealing with a lot of internal stuff, we see some stuff from his childhood that really has traumatized him, and we see kind of his internal struggles. As I said, that's a huge part of the book, just him thinking about his internal struggles. And I really loved a lot about this book, but I also just think there was something about the writing style or the actual plot, or I don't know, there's something that just did not keep me engaged. There was parts where I was forcing myself through the book, and so for that reason, I'm not rating it, because I can't say that I didn't like it. Like, I really enjoyed a lot of it, and then I can't even give a good reason for the parts I didn't enjoy. I don't know if it was pacing or I just don't know. But I think it's a really good book. I think it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, or it might have even won, and definitely deserves that. And I see where the appeal comes from, and I see why so many people like it. There was just something about it that didn't quite connect with me, but I really think that it's well worth your time, and I think a lot of people will get a lot out of this book, and you should probably read it and not listen to me. Okay, the last book I read this month is definitely also my favorite book, and probably is going to become one of my all-time favorite books, and that's Young Mungo by Douglas Stewart. I think last month or the month before, I read Shuggie Bain, which was this author's first book that came out a few years ago in 2020, and that I loved a lot. I give it 4 stars, and this is in a very similar setting. We're in Glasgow in the 1980s, and we're following this poor family, and we're following a kid in that poor family who struggles with issues of masculinity, and a mother who has problems with alcoholism, and that's the same throughout both of these books. But this book really focuses on the relationship between him and his brother and his sister and his mom, and also he is forming a relationship with another boy in Glasgow named James. And this also takes place across 2 timelines. There's before this event that happened and after, and we don't really know what happens, but it's easy until later in the book, but it's easy to kind of infer from the subject matter that it wasn't something good. And throughout this whole book, there's this underlying tension between the Catholics and the Protestants, and James is Catholic and Mungo is Protestant, and Mungo's brother is leader of like the Protestant gang or whatever you want to call it. And this is a book that has a lot of violence in it. There's violence between kids, there's violence of adults towards kids, there's sexual assault, and there's a lot of moments in this book that are absolutely devastating and terrible to read and horrifying to read. But I think just the writing style, the characters, the atmosphere, the plot, just all came together and really wrecked me. I was like sobbing at the end of this book. It was just so well written, so well executed, and just so heartbreaking. Despite all that heartbreak, it still left me feeling happy by the end, and there was just something about this that's gonna stick with me for a long time, and I highly, highly recommend you read this. It's probably one of the best books I've read this year, and I gave it 5 stars. And I know a lot of people, I think, criticize this for being so similar to Shuggie Bain, and I see that, I really do, but for me, I didn't care. I just thought this was different enough that it worked for me, and the differences actually made it connect with me even more. So once again, just really, really good. And I'd say this and people like Shuggie Bain more generally, but I think they're both incredible stories, and I can't wait to see what he writes next. Okay, that's gonna do it. Those are the 7 books that I read in April. And as I said, very good month. I read a lot of really good books that are gonna stick with me, and I don't know how I'm gonna top it this month. I probably will not, but hopefully I read a lot of good books in May too. We'll see in a month when I do this again. I hope you enjoyed this video. I try to post videos once a week. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less, but feel free to like, comment, and subscribe if you want, and I will see you in the next one.